Good morning all. We're just waiting a couple more seconds for everyone to join and we'll kick off soon. Okay, we might kick off. We've got a big agenda this morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the IAB's MeasureUp conference. I'm Natalie Stanbury. I'm the Research Director at the IAB, and I'm going to be guiding you through today's event. Thank you for joining us. The IAB are very excited to be holding our 4th annual MeasureUp conference this week. The team are missing seeing all of you in person, of course, but we have 3 mornings full of insight into marketing effectiveness and the science of measurement. Huge thanks to all of our presenters this week and panelists for sharing their data, insight and experience with us. Also like to extend a very sincere thanks to our sponsors, Google, IAS, Ipsos and Facebook, for supporting the IAB and helping present MeasureUp this year in what's been somewhat a different year for all of us. So welcome to day 2. Today we have another lineup of amazing content and speakers. We're taking you on a bit of a data revolution today. We're going to start with omni-channel measurement in retail. We're also covering building resilient advertising and the power and importance of context. We've got a great panel lineup on the topic of how to get started on your first-party data strategy. And we've also got the first of our 2 MeasureUp award winners presenting their award-winning entry. As we announced in the opening of MeasureUp yesterday, Playground XYZ are the winner of the Best Advertising Effectiveness Research Study, and we'll present some of the highlights of their study on attention time today. Please feel free to post questions to the speakers in the chat box, and we'll do our best to do a short Q&A at the end of each session. So let's get going. We're going to kick off the day with some thoughts from you, our audience, via our live audience poll presented by Ipsos. Each day of MeasureUp, Ipsos are presenting a couple of questions to our audience to get your brains ticking over some of the agenda topics of the day. Today, I'm joined by Kirsten Riolo, the Director of Social Intelligence and Analytics at Ipsos, and she's going to take you through some of the questions. Welcome, Kirsten.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the introduction.
No worries. So yesterday's poll, we had some very interesting insights on measurement challenges for the industry, and some sentiment around advertising investment. What have you got for us today?
Okay. Well, given that we've got such an exciting day ahead, we thought it'd be really good to sort of get our minds thinking, as you said, ticking over, but also get a feel for how people are thinking about the topics that are being presented today. So whether it be omni-channel measurement or building resilient advertising at the moment, but also as we progress into the sort of next layer of what we need to do from a technical perspective, what our first party data strategies might be and how people are getting started. So with that as the context, we've got a couple of questions that sort of talk to those topics. Really encourage everyone to get involved. We'd love to know what you're thinking. We'd love to sort of see how, even ongoing material that we can sort of put forward will be useful to sort of answer the journey that you're on with regard to these topics. So we might just get started with the poll straight away. I would say that when you see these questions, they're single answer responses. So please, just pick one. It's pretty simple, but it's a nice way to kick off the day in addition to a coffee you might have with your computer at the moment. The first one here is, How well do you feel that you understand the changes occurring with cookies and the impact on advertising effectiveness measurement? You can choose to be an expert and be asked anything. Maybe you feel somewhat informed but would like to know more, or you have no understanding at all. So just think,
which is fine too,
a moment or so about where you feel you are with regard to that question. So cookies and the impact on advertising effectiveness measurement. We're seeing some results at the IAB side. Is it all coming through? Awesome. Thanks everyone for getting involved. Okay. Oh,
results.
Oh, we've done a second one too. You guys are off the blocks this morning. So really interesting results here. So let's just have a look at what we can see. So in terms of the cookies and the impact on effectiveness measurement, clearly there's a really good bunch of feedback around wanting to know more, and a group of people who feel that they have no understanding. The experts, I'm sure, will still enjoy what we're seeing for the day and can always take something away from the panels that are taking place later and some of those really interesting strategies that are now being thought through. I think the key thing for us, of course, is that the cookie world is changing, much like 2020. There's a few other things that are coming into play, and we'll look forward to being able to work through that with you as part of the IAB. Ipsos is part of that too, and being able to, I guess, address any of those changes that are coming through the door. I mean, third-party cookies have been a bit of an issue for a while, but now as we move into this new world, it's going to be really funneling through into the second question, which is about understanding the principles of Australian privacy law regarding the collecting and use of first-party data. And again, we're seeing similar results here. I think there's a consistency in terms of these findings about really wanting to stay informed and wanting to know more about what's happening and how you can better shore up those plans. I think, you know, the importance of first-party data now is coming into its place, not only in terms of the strategies that can, you know, better help with, you know, understanding what the customer is doing, understanding what campaigns are doing, but also being able to be on top of what has been one of the key areas of this around privacy, you know, and in the last few years, we've seen quite a few issues come to the fore in the industry, and making sure that you're on top of that now is so important, because that scrutiny is there, but also the quality of that data that you need to have on hand is one of those things that will certainly play out over the next wee while. So knowing where you sit, or indeed what you need to know and who to ask questions about, is going to be so important. But also, I'm not going to preempt what everyone else is talking about today, but I would say that there's a really great paper that the IAB has recently released called Beyond the Cookie, in terms of mapping out the future of measurement and how that can be addressed. There's some pretty accessible information in there, and also some great links to other papers and other, I guess, activities that are taking place, not only here, but globally. So the link's just gone up on the screen, you can see. Please feel free to click through to it. You know, after today probably puts a bit of context in place for what's being talked about, but it's a great ready reckoner, particularly for anybody, whether it's industry side, agency, or whether you're an advertiser as well. So very, very accessible, highly recommend it. And Nat has been one of the key organisers of it, and she's also an amazing source of information. With that, I will hand back to your capable hands, Natalie. And
thank you. Thanks, Kirsten. That's wonderful. So definitely some room to improve our knowledge here. We're not alone. We'll see if we can help out with some of that in our sessions today. So thanks so much, Kirsten. So it's now my pleasure to introduce you to our first presentation of today. Please welcome Hamish Morgan, Measurement Lead at Facebook, and Aman Bezardian, Head of Data Science at Woolies X. Hamish is going to start off with a presentation on omni-channel measurement in retail and follow up with a Q&A discussion with Aman on how Woolies are putting this into practice. Welcome to MeasureUp, Hamish and Aman.
Thanks, Nat. Thanks for having me, and good to see you all, or sort of see you all in this virtual world. And a big shout out to all the Melbourne peeps out there with me. Hang in there, guys. We're almost there.
You're welcome to take the screen. Yeah.
I will take the screen. And away we go.
Yep, you got it.
Terrific.
Perfect.
There we go. Okay, so as Nat mentioned before, I'm going to take you through just some sort of bite-sized insights into what we're seeing at Facebook in terms of both during the COVID period and then what we see is coming out of there. And then we're going to go through some hard-hitting questions with Aman, who's really an expert in this field and someone that I've been working really closely with for, well over 2 years now. So my name's Hamish, as Nat introduced me before. I've been working at Facebook for a bit over 2.5 years now, and I cover the retail book. So I look after many of the big retailers that you probably shop at with daily. And I've been on a pretty interesting journey with a lot of them going through the through this COVID period. It's fair to say that there's been a lot of bumps along the way, and we've learnt a lot as teams about what the customer needs and how we need to respond to them. And so I'm going to share some of those insights with you then first. Then I'm going to jump to some Q&A with Aman. And also there is time at the end of my presentation and my interview with Aman for any questions from the audience as well. So if you've got any good ones, please don't try and stump me, but I'm sure if any of the content does drive some further questions, please feel free to reach out in the Q&A box down below, and Nat will relay that back to me. So like we've seen, and I'm sure you're all aware that shopping has fundamentally changed during COVID, and that's no surprise whether you're in Australia where retail's been locked down, if you're in Asia where things have been extremely locked down as well, and New Zealand as well, and there's probably some others around the world tuning in. But it's fair to say things have leapt in a very different direction than anyone was anticipating. And so with that comes a new set of expectations. And before COVID, what we were seeing in globally, we were seeing that at least 8 out of every 10 purchases was happening in store for the retailers. So if you think through the through that chain of the North America, Australia, High Street, United Kingdom, retail scenario, most of that is driven by bricks and mortar sales. There is definitely a prevalence and a growth of e-com coming through there, but most of those sales were happening in store. But whilst they were happening in store, a lot of those journeys, in fact, the majority of those journeys are starting online in some particular way, shape or form. But then COVID hit. And you're going to hear that a lot over the next couple of years, but then COVID hit. But when COVID hit, what we saw from that was, and what you can see on the screen now is that the US economic penetration percentage of retail sales, but what you can see is this rapid jump to online. And in part that is due to necessity in that shops are closed. Particularly in parts of Australia, we went through hard lockdown, and if you're in Melbourne, retail is still closed right now. And what we also saw through that is a real adoption of unique ways of reaching the customers. And one of my colleagues at Facebook likes to describe this as we went from this transition to online that was taking a slow boat of about 3 years, and that happened in about 8 weeks. And we've jumped to this place now, and retailers had to jump on board and get with it really quickly, and so the customer. And so what we've also seen is 85% of people are now shopping online globally, And those two numbers there, which I think are really interesting, is that the Gen Xers and the baby boomers as well have jumped on board, and their time spent shopping has dramatically increased too. So there's this big adoption that's happened, either through necessity of the shops aren't open, or just for security and safety. Some people don't want to be outside, and it's just easier to be shopping online in those situations. But with that also comes that we know that there is going to be a pivot back at some point. And I'll just draw your attention to this graph here, this table here, in that we know that whilst there is a necessity right now for some regions and still for that safety purpose, there is still a preference to pivot back in some way, shape or form to the old world, or in this COVID normal that we keep being referred to, that there is going to be some sort of shift back of customer behaviour. And you can see here that there is definitely a prevalence in many of these subverticals listed above, that whilst I'm purchasing online now, I would still prefer to buy in store. So how does a retailer deal with this? Because we've already shifted once, now we're going to have to shift again, but we don't know where we're shifting to. And so what that leads us to is that we know that the path to purchase is going to become even more dynamic. We know that through surveys we've put in the field with Ipsos, that 57% of survey respondents said that they want to resume regular activity over time. Over time, we don't know what that means though. We don't know how that will transition, and we don't know in what way, shape or form. But it's really an important concept for the retailers out there to understand that customers are going to be nervous. There is going to be this shift in expectations that need to be met by a retailer in order to meet the customer where they are comfortable. And so I never thought I'd ever saw a retail side that talked to safety, but here we are, in that convenience and safety is determining where people will shop when they come out. And that's what we're getting back from our survey results when we're running these in field, that safety and convenience are really, really going to be vital for re-establishing or restarting that in-store shopping experience in whatever format that is. So whether that is providing the safety in store, or whether that is also offering solutions like buy online, pick up in store, or put in boots, and all these other ways that retailers are finding to make these frictionless and contactless shopping experiences attractive to our customers. And so I think we're going to see this further blurring of lines between digital and physical retail. And it's going to be fascinating to watch, but it's going to be really difficult for retailers to react so quickly in order to make sure that they are at front of mind when a customer is thinking, I need to go buy, this widget, where do I get it from? I need to go somewhere where I'm comfortable and safe, or I need to go where it's convenient. So what we're going to see is this need and this absolute desire from the customer to find comprehensive product information. I don't know if any of you have noticed in your online shopping experiences, the frustration when you don't actually know exactly what the product is you're buying, but because it's not open, you actually have to just either buy it or not buy it and consider the refund or the return. We're going to be definitely leaning towards more personalized discovery now. We've seen a number of retailers like Coles and Dan Murphy's throw out the paper catalogue. And now we're watching this transition to how do I deliver a personalized experience at scale in a digital platform. We're going to need to understand how customers can transition between a shopping experience, both inline and online, in-store and online seamlessly, so that the customer's known and it's a seamless experience. And that's going to give them that convenience. And also it's going to deliver that frictionless experience where it's something that is not a chore in order to meet this new world that we're going to be walking into. But in measurement in all of that, there becomes a serious challenge in that a lot of sales, it can be easier to measure online sales because they happen through an online pathway. But obviously, we know as people transition back to the COVID normal world that those sales are going to come back in store, and there is this this thought process that has been out there for some time, and it probably doesn't exist on the people on this call because you're all very smart people in the measurement and analytics and optimization world. But in some retailers, there is this concept that digital advertising or online advertising only affects online sales, and we know that that's not the case. So particularly at Facebook, what we've seen is that we need to provide an easy way for retailers to link that in-store transaction with the online activity. And so we've got a number of ways of doing that, and I'll take you through some of these, and then we'll talk more broadly with Aman about how Woolworths Group have achieved this as well. So there are a number of ways in which we can do it. That there's the basic way of bringing data in and viewing it in Ads Manager and Facebook Attribution, which gives you an attributed store sale. But really the gold standard in measurement is when we can run a controlled experiment and we can hold out a group and we can state with confidence that an ad on Facebook drove a purchase in store. And so we feel that this is really where retailers need to be playing in either that attributed store sales, or if they can, to get to that point of understanding the incremental sales or incremental conversions or incremental buyers that their advertising is delivering to their business. So in that, we need signal. So signal, as the people on the call will know, signal and data is where this game's won. So from Facebook's perspective, we've got 3 ways of helping retailers work with us in providing those signals. The first one is the Facebook Pixel and the conversion API. So you're probably hearing, for those of you dealing with Facebook at the moment, you're probably hearing a few conversations about conversion API at the moment. And that has to do with how we transition into this new world of iOS 14 and IDFA and so forth. So, but what this does is gives us a view into the granular transactions that are occurring on your websites. And also we do have the ability to attach some code to the Facebook Pixel in order to understand any BOPUS or buy online, pick up in store behavior from your customers. If you're running an app, we have the Facebook SDK that gives you that same functionality. And then if you then want to start tracking your in-store conversions from your online activity, that's where we start to talk to offline conversions. And offline conversions is where Facebook have the ability to join activity on our platform with the transactions that are happening in a physical presence in a bricks and mortar capacity. And so we've got 3 ways of getting there here. We've got the simple way, which is uploading transactions, and that's done through a CSV file, and there's no technical expertise required, and it's very simple. We've got a number of partners who can help retailers with this as well. And then there is the big daddy of API integration. So this is actually snapping directly into our offline conversions API and providing a real-time connection between your transactions and our activity. And in all of these, what this does provide, it gives you certain options aside from measurement down the road of delivering optimized advertisements to your customers. So driving people in store who are more likely to go in store, as an example. And as you can see on the bottom there, the technical expertise or the maintenance required, it transitions to the right of the screen here, in that CSV is very easy to upload. API integrations can be quite difficult, and that's why we have a set of partners in the middle to help you. But I think that's enough from me. I'd like to introduce Aman if I could. Aman, you're there.
Hi, Hamish.
Hi, Aman. Welcome to MeasureUp.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we are very glad to have you here. So, I'll just, there we go, resume share, there we go, sorry. Aman, We've been working together for about 2.5 years at Facebook now, and we actually met back in your Analect days, where Carl and I were working with you on an auto MMM of all things, an auto MMM meta. But it's been a fun journey, and we've done a lot together. So perhaps if you could start by introducing yourself, tell us a little bit about your role at WooliesX. Tell us a little bit about WooliesX too, because there might be some people who don't exactly know what WooliesX is and how that snaps into the wider Woolworths group, and also about your journey and how you got here.
Absolutely. So WooliesX is basically the data and digital arm of Woolworths Group. And the rationale of having a separate entity was to basically attract the smarts and talent required for data capabilities and digital capabilities. So the loyalty program, rewards program, as well as the e-commerce part of the business are sitting with WooliesX. And as the data science team, we are trying to personalize the offers and provide, really personalized message and offer with the right depth to the customers, especially in this hard time that the offers can help the Australians with, sometimes a bit hardship of financial, the recession that we have at the moment. And predominantly we've been active in targeting and measurement using data science approaches, and we kind of see that as flip side of the same coin. We target using data science capabilities, and we measure our success and optimize, and we feedback that to the targeting engine.
Right. Yes. So, and it's a lot of work, obviously, to plumb that and get that to market at scale, and it's quite a difficult problem. But in terms of, if I could just focus on WooliesX for a minute, could you just walk me through, because it's quite a unique organisation. I've spent a lot of time both in your actual buildings and talking to many of your staff and the team there. And it's quite a unique organisation that it's very fast. It's trying to do a lot of things very quickly, and it does it really well. And it's got a great talent team there. Like you've been very fortunate to grab some great resources and really smart people there. But I wonder if you could just tell me a little bit about, the strategy that you have in terms of data science and delivery inside the building.
Absolutely. As you said it, Hamish, it's more about the people and capability rather than the products. We've been trying to attract smart from, across the board, whether it's, whether we have some astrophysicists in the data science team, we have a lot of engineers. And so firstly, we are looking for problem solving and creativity and learnability as the three main skills. And also organizationally, there's a very good integration between marketing teams and data science team. And we have that collaboration culture that data scientists are not just working on some cool technologies, they are actually solving the everyday problems that marketing team throw at us. And I think that's probably one of the main kind of secret sources of success in any organization. I think to a good extent, this culture is because of the good relationship on GM level from GM of data science and AI and GM of marketing, and the very great integration that we have on that level.
Yeah, and also and recently you've just shifted to an agile delivery method, and actually I think you're still in the midst of breaking that down. How's that going? Because I've been through it myself in a previous world, and it's not easy. And I'm sure there are people on the call that have been through it or are in it at the moment. It's not an easy thing to do. So have you got any tips and tricks for the team out there?
Well, it's absolutely not easy at all, but it's very fruitful and productive. We can see already the changes that it's making to the ways of working structure and how much efficiency we can expect in the coming quarters. So basically, agile is all about having very self-contained and sustainable squads that end-to-end, all the capabilities required are sitting with each other. So a back-end developer or a data scientist or a marketer and the client-facing, let's say a JavaScript developer, for example, they are all in it for solving the problem. Therefore, end-to-end overview is provided to the team members. So yes, it's not easy at all, but definitely it's worth the change from the hard structure to agile structure.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. So I think probably where I'd like to just go on a couple of paths here, but the first path I want to go is Woolies X has got a real commitment to incrementality, and it's a topic dear to my heart. Can you walk through exactly how Woolies X goes through the process of setting performance KPIs and provides motivation for the team to drive the business the way it does?
Absolutely. So talking theoretically and starting from the concept of KPIs, as the name suggests, it should be the best indicator of your performance. And it should have, let's say, linear relationship, having my data science hat on, a linear relationship with amount of effort that you put with the, how much efficiently and how optimized you work. That itself indicates that the base success or the base spend in our case should not be measured as part of the success. We should not open the champagne because the sales has gone over the last year or so. We know that it wasn't because of our performance. It was more because of change in the environment and COVID. Organizationally, on marketing activities that we run, we use incrementality as the main KPI. So there can be easily a particular, let's say, transaction or a particular customer's order that has lower value, but we identify a bigger portion of that is incremental. And we optimize our targeting engine to target such a person rather than some other customer that would have had a bigger purchase. But even if we don't do any marketing at all, that purchase would have happened anyway. This is easy in theory and everyone is agreeing, but how to identify that incremental portion of a basket is a real challenge that you're using data science to solve the problem.
And perhaps that's a good segue then to dive into how you do it, and really try and give the people at home and on the call just some ideas about how to implement such a comprehensive process. I mean, measurement at Woolies X is embedded into everything you do, and I think that probably the framework that you have at the moment has got to be close to best in class in Australia and possibly globally as well, from what I've seen, given the ingestion of data and the application and drive through deterministic models and probabilistic models as well. Can you give us, from a high level, of course, don't give away the secret sauce, but can you just give us a view about how that process works of understanding incremental benefit driven from customers?
Absolutely. So without giving the IP away, as I said it, high level, we put ourselves in the shoe of the customer. We don't try to see the ball from our business point of view, but from the customer's point of view. Our measurement is all customer driven, not business focused. It means if you have a new campaign, it doesn't necessarily mean that the customer is going to spend more, because the discretionary income of the customer is limited. It's even more likely to be limited in this financial year with all the financial hardships that Australians have. So first thing is to understand that the transactions are all coming from same pocket. It doesn't depend on the campaigns that we run. It doesn't depend on point of sale. It's not that customers have two pockets, one for online transactions and one for in-store transactions, as a good example. So measurement is on customers, it's not on campaigns or any other construct of business. Secondly, we have the overlap, or we have separated the decisioning or measurement stages. So we have the overlap of channels, we have the overlap of campaigns, and the offers. So we try to include as much as possible from all the activities that we do, and measure in presence of all those signals.
Yep.
And maybe lastly is having high quality base reference, be it groups or whole data groups or whatever else that is getting used. So having a group of customers that we are completely putting them in dark is an important point, and to make sure we know what would have been the natural demand of the market, regardless of our marketing activities.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? Understanding that baseline activity, what would happen if there was no advertising? What is that baseline drive? And in that, and it's probably a good segue to that as well. How do you know if the measurement's working, and how are you then? How does that give you the confidence to then take that up the chain to be actionable to CMOs and MDs and over to Woolies Supers and these sort of places?
That's a very good question. In measurement, we are in a space that there's no source of truth to cross-validate the model. For example, even if you explicitly ask the customer that, let's say a customer is leaving a Woolies supermarket, we ask them, from the $100 that you spend with us, how much of that do you think is incremental? Or how much of that do you think is incremental because of the ads that you've seen on Facebook or Google or other channels? They themselves can't answer that. So it's a really hard challenge to validate your models. To us, consistency and responsiveness to the effort that we've put in our marketing activities is the key. So we make sure the measurement engines that we make don't overclaim success.
Yes.
Let's say if we run a hypothetical campaign, and the campaign is nothing, we just pretend that we had a campaign on a group of customers, and we feed that group to our measurement engine, and we see the incrementality claimed is 100K, that shows that our measurement methodology is over attributing.
Yes. Yeah.
At the same time, we see when we have every other parameter being the same, then we have, for example, double the audience size, or when we have double some other parameters of the campaign, how much the incrementality has gone up. If it has nearly gone up twice, well, that's a great news. But if it has just gone up like 1% or 2%, it means that what we were initially measuring wasn't incrementality. It was the base as well as incrementality.
Yeah.
And that base, of course, is not going to be doubled because we are, targeting a bigger group of customers, for example.
Yeah. And what's your go-to hypothetical campaign, Imam?
Well, we have a running joke. We use the Dove beer company from, Simpsons.
Yes, that's good.
We pretend that we have a kind of a partnership with that, and we see if we get any incrementality from that hypothetical campaign. Yeah,
good. Hopefully you don't. In terms of the data that you're using and the models that you're developing and then productionizing to run the beast, what does that look like, and how much work is involved in maintaining and developing that?
We have a strategic partnership with Google, and all of our data science capabilities are on Google Cloud platform.
Yep.
And maintenance of it should not be underestimated. So it's one thing to develop the capability, and it's another thing to have continuous improvement and development. That when organizations are planning, they should consider both components.
Yeah.
In terms of our strategy, we, after a proof of concept, we always go for data science solutions at scale. We don't do any ad hoc analysis from measurement point of view, and we aim to get to an engine stage rather than data science for ad hoc requests. And of course, the machine learning development part and the data science part goes hand in hand. There are a lot of engineering components involved for data collection and feature engineering that is just as important as the data science stage. At the moment, methodologies are so sophisticated that the competition is now more on quality data and quality feature engineering stage that should be acknowledged here.
Yeah. And then in terms of how that then goes out to market. So you have one of the most comprehensive loyalty programs in Australia. So how does the models that are developed, the data that's ingested, the smarts that you put into the machine, how does that then translate into actions and activities, both online and offline?
Well, the key is the word that you just used, online and offline. I make this saying kind of popular in our organization that if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes multiple campaigns and channels and point of sales to convert a customer.
Yep.
Having strategic partnerships with tech giants such as yourself and Facebook and Google, and also aiming to include what is reality of transactions, which is the effect of online on in-store as well as in-store on online.
Yeah.
And planning for a strategic solution that ongoingly it can feed the required data is the key. We should try to isolate the effect of our own campaigns activity, because that's what sits on the my team, and ignore everything else that is happening to the point that there's no technical limitation. We have to keep including data sources. And lastly, I am a big fan of deterministic methodologies because of the accuracy that it has, and because it doesn't use any assumption. So it's not trying to explain the variation of sales, for example, based on variation on, let's say, investment level that we have on weekly or monthly basis, but it is looking at every single transactions or engagement of our customers with our platform. So it's built on billion rows of data rather than just thousands of rows of data on investment.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned the strategic partnerships that you've got with both Facebook and Google. Could you maybe just elaborate a little bit on how, say, Facebook and Woolies X work together, and how we help you deliver these outcomes?
Sure. One of the great partnerships that we had with Facebook, with you guys, helped us to have quality control groups. That's just one of the examples. So imagine we are about to serve a campaign to a group of 1 million customers. If, let's say, 1 millisecond before we serve an impression to the customer, we hold that person back and we put that person in a control group or holdout, And we do that with a rate of 10%. So for 10% of our audiences, we always do that. We know the representation that we have in control group is exactly the same characteristic as the target group, because it was randomly selected at the very last millisecond before we start the campaign.
Yeah.
This on its own shows this is a very good quality control group, as let's say, in opposed to if we keep a control group on the 1 million customers that Woolworths intend to target, because as you know, there are a lot of dropouts in the funnel. So there can be some customers that we can identify on Facebook. There can be some customers that don't log in during the promo week to Facebook. So people that we think we've targeted are not exactly people that we are targeting.
Yeah.
So that's the big improvement that we had to our measurement engine thanks to this partnership.
Yeah, that's great. And then probably last question, and then I'll throw it to you, Nat, to have a look at any questions that have come from the field. There's a presentation coming shortly or later this morning talking about the importance of first-party data. And first-party data is obviously going to be a currency going forward now, and clean data and actionable data is going to be vital. So can you tell me a little bit about the importance of first-party data to Woolies and how you go about looking after that data?
Absolutely. Having a first-party data strategy is the key to success.
Yeah.
Let's say if you're running a campaign and you just rely on the third-party data that you receive, being impression and clicks, while it's a good representation of the engagement of the customer with the campaign, it does not say anything about the customer himself or herself. It doesn't say anything about what life stage they are at, what's the, I don't know, the demographics or the location and so on and so forth. And we know that in the black box being customers' decision-making process, it's not just the marketing activities that you do, it's also the life stage that he or she is in. So that's the first thing, to have a holistic view of the customer. And secondly, and most important thing to me, is to have a very strong loyalty program. The biggest loyalty program in Australia helped us a lot in terms of identifying the customers on different platforms and on different channels based on first-party data to make a real multi-touch attribution.
Yeah, that's great. Iman, thanks so much for your time. That's been very insightful and great to chat as always, like we do very regularly, but great to chat to you. And Nat, I'll throw to you if there are any questions from the audience.
Yeah, there are. Thank you so much, both of you, for speaking this morning, and so much on incrementality, which is absolutely close to my heart too, Hamish. I think fundamental to measuring success of campaigns. So thanks for that. The questions, a couple of the questions that have come through are a little bit related to what retailers are going through at the moment, the current situation, getting pulled in lots of different directions, and how to communicate, building trust to go back into store, seamless online experiences, and building out their digital offerings. Question: do you think COVID has meant that retailers have had to adjust their thinking to see the importance of digital and data?
I'll take that first, and then Iman, you've probably got some views on it. Look, absolutely. I think through necessity, right? There's so many businesses that are struggling right now because they weren't prepared, they weren't ready, and they haven't been able to pivot quickly enough in order to meet that demand. And we actually then see on the other side, you see those businesses that were ready to go and they turned it on really quickly and they've thrived. And I'm sure that if you thinking in your own head of some of the good customer experiences you've had online right now, you can identify 2 or 3 things about them being absolutely frictionless, and you know exactly what you're buying, and it wasn't a difficult transaction. And so some businesses haven't been ready for that, and some have, but just that fact of that friction point there has brought to light the importance of data and the importance of activating a great digital strategy. Iman, what are your thoughts?
No, absolutely, you're right. And, kudos to our website team and our colleagues in digital experience team. It's not easy to adopt when the traffic is going, 2-folded or 3-folded in a month. And basically, there are a lot of, not just in Australia, globally, there are a lot of changes that is due to this COVID situation. For example, online sampling in stores has a lot of hygiene and health risks.
Yeah.
It's ramping up globally in retail industry. There are a lot of other use cases, such as catalogs. So now there are a lot of attention to the digital catalogs in retail globally. It's not even limited to Australia. So the changes are coming. It's all about being agile and nimble and adopt based on whatever challenge that we have on a daily basis.
Thank you. And just probably one last one on measurement. So Woolies obviously a sophisticated a measurement business. For businesses out there who want to improve their marketing measurement, or address some of the changes coming into the future, what should they be doing right now? What's one piece of advice from you both for ramping up your measurement abilities and capabilities?
You first, mate.
No worries. I think maybe starting small and fail fast if we have to fail is always a very right kind of advice. So starting with a proof of concept on what we want and then ramping it up and putting the investment would be my first advice. And secondly, it's important to understand that the role of measurement is to be an indicator of your performance. Sometimes in organizations, it can be a challenge to discuss incrementality, because incrementality means smaller dollar values. Out of $100 basket sales, maybe, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, $5 is incremental. And everyone wants to celebrate bigger success, understandably. But the question is your measurement result kind of responsive to your performance or not? And that's what I aim for, and that's the cultural change that should happen in organizations.
Yeah, and my take on that would be data. It's first-party data is so important, and you can start small, but it knowing who your customer is so vital in understanding how to meet their needs. And so I would really encourage anyone who's starting down this path to really listen in on the session that's coming later, and then focus in on developing a quality first-party data strategy and making sure your data is clean and as well manicured as possible, because that then makes it usable and actionable, and it's going to be so important going forward.
Great advice from both of you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Great insight, and that's a great presentation. Thank you.
No worries, Nat. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Aman. Thanks, Hamish.
Bye.
Okay. Moving on to our next presentation now, I'd like to welcome back to MeasureUp Jessica Miles. Jessica is the Country Manager for IAS. And some of you may remember Jessica's presentation from last year at MeasureUp. She presented around the halo effect of quality content. Today, Jess is back to present on building resilient advertising and why context matters. So context is really important in nearly all instances of advertising, but most recently in focus due to its power in effective targeting and as a viable alternative to the shift from cookie-based targeting. To tell us more, welcome Jess.
Thanks for having me, Natalie.
Pleasure. You can take the screen there.
Great. I will share my screen.
All good, we got you.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks again. So today I'll be taking you through a number of research pieces that we've run this year. I'll mostly be touching on our power of context study, but I'll also be drawing from some other studies, such as the HALO study, which Natalie mentioned earlier, and also an ad adjacency study, which we ran in response to the increasing volumes of COVID content. So in early 2017, brand safety became the dominant topic in the digital ad world, with increased scrutiny into digital advertising due to the possibility of ads appearing again adjacent to risky content, like terrorist recruitment videos or pornography. And for a while, there wasn't much consensus on who should be responsible for addressing threats or how effective the digital marketing industry's overall response had been. But as we edge closer into 2021, that's mostly changed. Marketers now frequently indicate that they are satisfied with the steps the industry has taken to address brand safety. And we're now seeing the digital advertising landscape shift towards contextual targeting. And even though contextual targeting has been a part of the marketing mix for a while, it's regaining interest in today's environment, and that's partly due to the changes in privacy regulation. Consumers are becoming more protective over their online data and privacy. And we actually ran a recent consumer privacy survey, and it showed that 7 in 10 Australian consumers have taken action to help limit data collection when they're online. So this change in attitude has developed alongside the increasing regulations, and these regulations are like GDPR or the deprecation of third-party cookies by browsers. So this really brings us to the topic of today, which is context and how it can help advertisers build resilient advertising. So advertisers are turning to contextual targeting solutions as an alternative method, and this is to identify and message to a more relevant audience. So in the past, our research has shown that the quality of an advertising environment can influence how consumers perceive ads and associated brands. And last year at MeasureUp, I ran through this neuroscience research called the halo effect, which demonstrates the impact of an ad's environment and how that ad is perceived by its intended audience. Data was collected by NeuroInsight using a technique called steady state topography. This is a proprietary technology that tracks and records brain activity in real time. So before I move on to analyze the impact of context and sentiment, I'll just refresh you quickly on the results of the halo effect study. So since the inception of digital advertising, marketers have debated the impact of an ad's environment and how that ad is perceived by its intended audience. There are more and more instances of brands being scrutinized, which is why we did this halo effect research. So in this study, we saw that ads seen on high quality sites generated a very positive reaction. Moreover, when the same ad was seen on a low quality site, they were actively disliked. And you can see that ads were 74% more likable when they were seen against quality content. When advertising was running next to content on high quality sites, we also saw a more engaged audience. And in fact, here you can see a 20% higher engagement on audiences that viewed the ad on quality sites versus low quality sites. And finally, we found that quality content drives memorability. So by targeting high quality content, an advertiser can achieve nearly 1/3 greater memorability, showing that high quality sites offer a more conducive environment for brand recall. So overall reaction to low quality sites was neutral. However, ads appearing on those environments were actively disliked. So while the content itself wasn't creating negative connotations with consumers, if marketers are placing their ads next to this content, they run the risk of generating negative brand equity. This negative reaction to the same ads seen on low quality sites was experienced with 9% greater emotional intensity. So we know it's important to align your brand with content that align with your brand values. And we see in the Halo Effect survey that consumers may actually stop using your brand if it appears alongside low quality content. So to build resilient advertising, the first step is to invest in impressions that are aligned with quality content. And then the next step is to leverage the power of context. We know that brand safety practices are essential to marketing strategies. So what we want to know now is, how does sentiment influence consumers and their perception of a brand? In our Power of Context study, we asked consumers about context and sentiment. These are two valuable brand suitability factors, but advertising environments are complex and they're also evolving landscapes. So just because an article has a positive or even neutral sentiment, it doesn't mean that it's safe and or a suitable environment for all brands. And at the same time, what's suitable for one brand can look entirely different to another. So let me demonstrate this for you, as safety to suitability exists on a bit of a sliding scale. Brand safety refers to the controls that advertisers use to protect brands against negative impacts to the brand's consumer reputation. Threats to brand safety generally involve specific types of content, and most are universal, in that most brands want to avoid that type of content. Brand suitability describes a marketer's desired targeting parameters regarding subjective variables. These can include factors such as content adjacency, as well as audience demographics. In this sliding scale here, you can see the shift from brand safety on the left through to topical and verticalized category, and to brand suitability on the right. To expand on the insights from the halo effect and answer the question, how does sentiment influence consumers and their perception of a brand? We ran an online survey to determine the types of ads consumers prefer to see in different environments, and how the sentiment of an article affects their feelings towards the surrounding brands and advertisements. So first and foremost, we see that consumers are paying attention. The majority of consumers think it's important for digital ads to appear alongside relevant content. In other words, consumers value seeing advertisements that are related to the topics of the articles they're consuming online. And consumers didn't just prefer contextual relevance. In this study, they stated that the perception of an advertisement was impacted by the content around the ad, with 72 participants agreeing that the content they are viewing influences their opinion of the ads on the page. We presented the participants with real-world examples and asked consumers to demonstrate their preferences when it came to contextual relevance. We wanted to understand whether consumers prefer to see ads that are aligned with the content they're consuming, regardless of category. And based on the responses from the participants, we found that when shown articles representing different verticals, consumers were consistent. They always prefer contextual relevance. Across the board, consumers paired the advertisements they prefer with articles categorized in the same content vertical. When we move past preference to understand if context had an impact on favorability and memorability of an ad, the majority of the participants agreed that contextual relevant ads impacted them beyond preference. We asked the question, how would you feel toward a brand that advertises across relevant content? And how likely will you remember the ad? And the participants responded that relevant ads not only are more memorable, but are also likely to foster a more favorable consumer opinion towards the brand. And so we've established that the context of a page is important, that the majority of the consumers that want ads that are contextually relevant to the content on the page across all categories and across all verticals. The next important step is to understand the sentiments, since relevant advertisements and page content aren't the only details that consumers notice. Sentiment refers to whether an article conveys a positive, neutral, or negative feeling to the consumer reading it. And consumers understand shifts in sentiment, and the majority believe that the sentiment of an article impacts their opinion of a brand alongside it. We can look at this ad adjacency study that we ran during COVID to understand the impact sentiment has on the perception of the brand. We ran this study in response to the increasing news articles on coronavirus. And our aim was really to understand whether advertisers could still benefit from appearing across COVID content that had a positive sentiment instead of blocking the entire category, given the amount of time consumers were spending with this type of content. And you can see that consumers increasingly favoured a brand as the sentiment of the content adjacent to the ad changes from negative to neutral to positive. During our ad adjacency analysis, which we ran twice over March and April, we wanted to further understand whether consumers had the same perception of an ad adjacent to COVID content regardless of category, or whether some categories were perceived differently. Based on our two studies over March and April, consumers were consistent in that they did not want to see travel ads, and this moved to first place. They also did not want to see food and beverage, real estate, which replaced CPG in the top 5 verticals they did not want to see. In comparison, consumers still preferred to see healthcare and government alongside coronavirus content. Additionally, they were keen to see not-for-profit, tech and telco as well. These insights demonstrate that context and brand suitability is unique to each brand. In addition to protecting brands from appearing next to unsafe content, an approach that focuses on brand suitability provides more granular control of content adjacencies. And this allows for the appropriateness of various contexts, really tailoring it for a specific brand. And what is deemed a suitable environment should be tailored to the brand according to the brand's own consumers' insights. Consumer perception of an advertisement is influenced by multiple factors. In our ad adjacency study, we also found that consumers are more likely to engage with ads seen on premium and recognizable news sources, even if the article features potentially risky content. And this is further supported by an IAB study called The Role of Context in News Environments, which used neuro research to identify that advertising in credible news media environments can increase brand associations with 3 particular attributes, those being timely, trustworthy, and connected, even if the ad appeared in a hard news environment. So if I revert back to our Power of Context study, we wanted to test the impact of sentiment on receptivity, favorability, and memorability outside of the current COVID environment. And so we presented mock-ups to participants. And the results showed that on average, consumers were more receptive to content with positive and neutral sentiment based on their online survey responses. They also stated that they were more favorable toward the associated brands and were more likely to remember the ads. Content with negative sentiment had a negative impact across all indicators, as you can see in the bottom row, but notably, memorability was less impacted by negative sentiment, indicating that consumers are still likely to remember ads in these environments. We ran 3 key tests across 3 verticals, auto, financial, and retail. But for today, I'll just be taking you through the retail results, given we are approaching a busy shopping season. We gave this example to participants and asked how receptive were towards this ad, how they feel towards the brand, and how likely they were to remember the ad adjacent to this headline. And then we asked the same questions against this headline to understand the impact on their responses. The results for retail showed the greatest impact on consumer perception across the brand metrics versus the results we saw in other verticals. And the results are pretty timely and good to know given the time of year we're in. It's no longer, well, when we think about holiday shopping, it's no longer about catalogs and shopping centers. It's really about consumers going online and discovering deals and gift ideas online. And consumers are transitioning more and more to online shopping given the current restrictions. So it's even more important to build strategies that ensure resilient advertising. Given the current environment, the majority of consumers will be shopping online, and advertisers need to ensure that their messages are being set up for success, reaching the right consumers and making an impact. In this particular holiday shopping study, which we recently ran, we also find that holiday shoppers find online ads not only helpful, but also able to reduce time and stress. So as a retail advertiser, it's important to keep a few things in mind. Consumers are shopping online. They find online ads important in their online shopping journey, and they also want ads that are relevant. And similarly to our ad adjacency study, it's not only the context of the surrounding content that's important, but also peering across safe and reputable sites has just as much impact on how your ad is perceived. When brand suitability is ignored, it does come with consequences, which is demonstrated in this study conducted in partnership with Digiday. Certain types of threats are more closely aligned to brand suitability, especially those involving placements in front of the wrong audience demographic or within content unrelated to the brand. And in response, the industry is becoming far more adept at accounting for safety and suitability with the targeting of ads in nuanced ways that are tailored for a brand's needs. So this is in stark contrast to like the blunt force or all or nothing approach that was executed maybe 1 to 2 years ago. So the key takeaway here is that when brands suffer negative brand suitability or negative brand safety episodes, it can lead to both revenue loss and brand equity decline. But when a marketer leverages the power of context, paying close attention to the opportunity provided by sentiment analysis, the ability to drive up those brand metrics, receptivity, favorability, and memorability is significant. So one of the most important advantages of using a contextual approach is that it allows advertisers to identify brand suitable environments for their advertising based on the context of each word. So this empowers advertisers to use more inventory and reach more consumers in safe and brand appropriate environments. This idea of brand suitability introduces nuance, which expands beyond brand safety. This means your ads are not just safe or unsafe, but rather a consumer's mindset is being considered. Contextual campaigns can be measured and optimized over time to improve ROI, find new brand suitable categories, and expand reach. And it can also be taken advantage of with seasonal opportunities, real-time events, so that advertisers can ensure that their campaigns are relevant, timely, and impactful. So how do we do this given the research that I've just presented today? So firstly, contextual relevance is important. Consumers agree that contextual relevance is important and that it impacts their perception of the surrounding brands and advertisements. For an advertiser, that means understanding the context that is right for your brand and the type of content that your audience consumes that resonates with your brand. A best practice that was highlighted in the IAB UK's paper on contextual advertising was to take a multifaceted approach. Contextual targeting goes beyond keywords and consists of many factors such as topics, feelings, entities, and sentiment. When planning your contextual targeting, consider how you can target by using a combination of these tactics. The suitability of an environment affects receptivity and memorability of the ads, as well as the favorability towards the associated brand. We see that more consumers not only want to see ads that match the page content, but will also perceive ads more favorably and remember those ads if the ad is in a contextually relevant environment. An additional important takeaway is that consumers prefer to see contextually relevant ads on safe and reputable sites. Credible news media environments demonstrate strong attributes, which means that advertisers can benefit from that transferred equity and goodwill sitting within these environments. And finally, this requirement for contextual relevance and suitability is apparent across all verticals. Consumers were not only more receptive to ads alongside relevant content, but all brand metrics were positively impacted when the ad was aligned with positive or neutral headlines within contextually relevant and suitable content. Coming into the busier shopping season of the year, we are seeing an increasing shift to online shopping. So it's now more important than ever to build that resilient advertising strategy by deploying a sound brand safety approach combined with control over context and sentiment. Targeting ads in nuanced ways that are tailored to a brand's own needs and means that the brand can maintain scale, appear across content that may have been shunned previously. And the COVID content is a prime example of that. Even the most cautious advertisers can still appear across COVID content by targeting articles of positive sentiment. This multifaceted approach will not only ensure resilience, but also effectiveness. So the three takeaways here are context, suitability, and sentiment as key strategies to build resilience in advertising. I've touched on a number of studies today, the halo effect, power of context, and coronavirus ad adjacency to name a few. If you'd like to download any of these studies, you can find them at our IS Insider page. And you'll also be able to download our latest media quality report, which has some industry benchmarks. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jess. We'll get that link to your material there, but just post it in the chat box so people can find that. Thanks for a great presentation. I just wanted to, you were involved in the IAB UK's recent paper on how to harness the power of contextual advertising, which is also a great paper. Is there any further advice from that you want to bring, I guess, around the practice in how to effectively use the power of context?
Yeah, definitely. So firstly, the IAB UK's paper is a brilliant resource, and I thoroughly encourage everyone to download it. And I guess it goes through about 9 best practices, which are also relevant and important. But if I was to take one of them, or maybe combine 2 of them, it would be to take that multifaceted approach, but also factor in your brand's own consumer insights. So what this means is making sure you're building a targeting segment that goes beyond keywords, consists of those topics, feelings, entities, and sentiments. And then this will allow advertisers to start to reach new audiences. And when we start to layer in that idea of taking in a brand's own consumer insights, it's really about understanding where the consumers are. There was a really great example in that paper about an outdoor clothing retailer. And the example is that traditionally the outdoor clothing retailer, if it wanted to be contextually relevant, it would target content around camping, hiking, and outdoor activities. But to reach its consumers, it will also target where the consumers' interests are. So that could be yoga blogs, dog training, travel advice, nature documentaries. And by targeting these areas that also resonate with the outdoor clothing retailer's brand, they can also extend their reach to their audience around interest pieces that their audience is interested in.
Fabulous. Thanks for joining us again at MeasureUp this year, Jess. It was a great presentation.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. Okay, just pop our screen up there. Our next session today is a presentation and panel discussion on how to get started on your first-party data strategy. The retirement of the third-party cookie presents significant opportunities for marketers to gain competitive advantage if they can take control of their first-party data and make it as comprehensive and usable as possible. This session is going to be moderated by our own IAB tech lead, Jonas Janamaji. JJ is going to introduce you to our wonderful panel of experts here today, who are going to take us through the steps to building and gaining value from privacy compliant first-party data sets. Welcome, JJ.
Thank you. Thanks, Nat. How are you doing?
Great.
Marvellous. Well, thank you very much. Yes, this Festival of Measurement continues with this session, how to get started on your first-party data strategy. And I've got a wonderful lineup of participants here. Thank you in advance to all of you for joining us. In fact, for once, we've got Melburnians outnumbering those from Sydney, which is a rare delight. Matt, Sarah, and myself are all from Melbourne. So we have Angelo, Sydney-based, Director of Data Products at 9. He sits in our Data Council. Sarah's joining us from Kraft Heinz. Thank you in advance. We've got a VIP guest from the US in the form of Alex Cohn, who I have the great privilege of chatting to every couple of weeks or so. He's a Senior Director of Product Management there, but also one of the main leads on Project Rearc, and he's a very busy chap right now, I can tell you. And also we have Matt Bruty joining us from Digital Balance. So we will be going into a panel. Before that, we'll have a presentation from Matt. And please do send through the questions that you have to us on the Q&A, and I'll try and seamlessly weave it into the questions that I've got for the team here. But for now, I'm going to hand over to you, Matt, to get us going with your presentation on how cookies work and why they're relevant. So please take it away, Matt, and then we'll jump back into the panel.
Perfect. Cheers, Jonas. Thank you very much. Morning, everybody. So let's get things kicked off here. So I'm Matt from Digital Balance, and we are a digital and data strategy consultancy based in Melbourne. We also have offices in Perth and in Sydney. We specialize in data and analytics and optimization and personalization. And my role as solution architect is to design and deliver solutions that can support our clients' long-term objectives, often by making the most of what they already have and identifying gaps and making recommendations accordingly. Now, as you might well imagine, over the last year or so, the rate of change in areas around data governance and data restrictions has really started to ramp up and is keeping us very busy. So I thought it'd be a good idea to kick off this session just by understanding some of the history and driving force about why first-party data strategies are such a hot topic at the moment, to understand why we're all here. And to that end, I'm going to talk through a bit of a scene setting exercise by way of some common cookie use cases, some misconceptions that we hear from clients and in the industry, highlight the impact of some of these changes, and then round off with a few thoughts on where you might want to start focusing your efforts in terms of building out a first-party data strategy. So first up is looking at how cookies work and why they're relevant. So the first thing to note is a cookie is just a way of storing something in a browser. That's all it is. Keep a little bit of information, a bit of text in the browser. And they started off as a very simple way for websites to remember something about you. Before cookies came along, if you're on a website and you go from one page to the next, it couldn't remember anything about you. So if you, on an e-commerce website, put something in your basket, by the time you get to the next page, it's forgotten that fact. So this was a very useful piece of functionality that came along to help assist with that. But people very quickly realized that you could use this ability to store information about what people are doing across multiple websites. So for example, you could have a number of sites that are all operating Facebook marketing technology, usually referred to as a pixel. And Facebook will have its own cookie that's available on all of these websites. And critically, that cookie will contain an identifier. And this is an area where a lot of people get confused, mainly outside the industry more often than not. The cookie is not storing your name or an email address or a phone number. It's storing a random, uniquely generated number or value. There's no other cookie on earth which has the same value as this. So Facebook knows that every time it sees a cookie with this value, it's the same cookie, and therefore it's highly likely to be the same person. So you can see here that we have a cookie from Facebook with a unique ID in it. And if I was to go and visit websites and interact with them, I could go to Kogan, look at some headphones, it would note that. I might visit the Heinz site and look at some content there. It could note that information. Likewise, if I go to Coles and look at Kit Kats, it's going to build all of that up about me. And you can see that Facebook has now built up this list of interests and linked them to this Facebook ID. So that now when I go to Facebook and Facebook has a chance to put an advert in front of me, it's got this head start on the kind of things that I'm likely to buy because I've arrived with this cookie filled with information about what I'm interested in. And this is what Facebook uses to help decide what kind of content or what kind of adverts to put in front of me. And that's how cookies play a key role in digital marketing today. Now, if there was one slide from this brief presentation that I would ask everybody to take away, it is this slide in terms of the difference between a first and a third-party cookie. So this is where things get interesting when people talk about the differences between the two. They may often infer that they're two different things, and this is actually a bit of a misconception. So a cookie is a cookie. What changes is which website you are on when you're trying to look at the contents of that cookie. And it's that change in perspective that denotes a cookie as being first party or third party. So in terms of this diagram here, so we have a Facebook cookie that has been set in the browser, and it has an ID that's against me. Now, if I was to visit the Facebook website, from this perspective, I am on the Facebook site looking at a Facebook cookie, And in this context, it is a first-party cookie. But if I was then to visit the Heinz website, in this context, it is now a third-party cookie. It's the exact same cookie with the same values and the same content. But since I am no longer on the website that the cookie belongs to, it is essentially a third-party cookie. So hopefully that will be an interesting and a valuable point that everybody can recognize as being useful. So if we just continue here. So let's have a look at the example of some third-party cookies and what that loss can mean for you as a business. So to do that, I'm going to talk through an example of what retargeting is, also what information you need to make retargeting happen, and what's changing about how you can access that information as a business, why that's important, and what the impacts are going to be for you as a business. So the first thing to note is that for those of you not familiar with retargeting, a very brief description of this is that if a user visits Heinz and looks at some content, then they go to a publisher site, such as Facebook, we can retarget them with that content and have a continuation of the messaging in order to get that person engaged and bring them back to the Heinz site. That's retargeting in a nutshell. Now, hopefully that makes sense to everybody, but how we like to describe this, from my point of view, is to use the analogy of sending something in the post. So what are the things that we need in order to make retargeting happen? So the first thing that we need to have is obviously the item that we want to send, which in this case is going to be some sunglasses. So we can just stick those in the post box and away we go. It doesn't quite work like that. We do need a little bit more information. So the second item that we're going to need there is actually a method of sending these sunglasses. So we would, in this case, take a parcel, place the sunglasses in the parcel, go down to your post office, stick it on the counter, and away we go. Except we're still not quite there. We're still missing that third most important part of the equation here, which would be the actual address of the of where you need to send this content. And it's the combination of these three items together that allows us to actually send that parcel to me in Melbourne so that I can get my sunglasses. So we can equate these three things in our retargeting to relevant items as part of the retargeting activity. So we have the thing that we want to send, which is the information about what the user's done on site. We have the method we use to send it in terms of the internet. And just as we need to provide an accurate address on the parcel so that AusPost can get that parcel to me in Melbourne, we need to provide Facebook with some form of address or identifier so that they can take the information you're sending them and connect it to me inside Facebook. And thankfully, Facebook provides just such an identifier in the form of a unique value for every person that visits its website. And this value is what they store inside that cookie. So to just paint that picture again, in terms of how these items link together, we have the item we want to send in terms of our on-site info. We have the method of sending it, the internet, and we have the address that we want to send it to, which is that Facebook cookie ID. We combine the three together and we're able to conduct retargeting. And as you can see, the contents of that cookie are very, very important. So this is where we come to the talk of the impact around what's happening in the industry at the moment. So it's known by many names. It has a lot of different approaches that are being taken by different browsers. But essentially what's happening is browsers are restricting your ability to look inside third-party cookies. So what that means is that you would not be able to look inside the cookie and get the address, which means you're not going to be able to send the parcel, which essentially is going to have a big impact on any particular platform or tools or approaches that you are using that use third-party cookies. So to just clarify that, if you are in a situation where you have a third-party cookie and it is allowed, you can see inside the cookie, then you can use the contents of that cookie to send your parcel to the right place. However, if third-party cookies are blocked, you can't see inside the cookie, which means that we can't see the address, which means we are unable to send the parcel and actually get it delivered. And that obviously is a very big challenge. Now, to put that bluntly for where we are today, this is the current state of browsers as they exist today. And excuse me 1 second to just grab one item. Okay, we'll come back to that shortly. So as we exist today, most browsers have already blocked third-party cookies, but one major holdout for a long time has been Chrome, and their announcement at the start of 2020 has actually caused a lot of these conversations to start to happen. So we are essentially, by the time we reach 2022, we will be a situation where all major browsers are blocking access to third-party cookies. To repaint that for you, just as a very clear picture, that essentially means we'll be in a situation where we can't look inside the cookie to get hold of the address, which means we won't be able to send the parcel to Facebook, which means we won't be able to necessarily conduct retargeting in the way that we do today. And that user would potentially not be able to be re-engaged to come back to the Heinz site. Now, I should point out at this point, I'm merely using Facebook as an example here. This is equally an issue for lots of different platforms. And any tool or platform that's worth its salt, what they will be doing at this point in time is developing methods and solutions to allow them to still get that address to the other end of the pipe in an effective fashion. So for example, Facebook is approaching this by using its conversion API. So you should definitely be investigating that as a potential option. But just to outline the ramp up in speed and approach that this has gone through across the browsers, this is something that's picked up pace since about 2017 when it started with Safari. And obviously other browsers have come online during that period and started to talk about how they are going to restrict access to third-party cookies. And the big one was the start of 2020 when Chrome announced that it would be blocking third-party cookies from 2022. So that really is a big driver for a lot of the conversations that we're looking at today. So hopefully that sets the scene a little bit as to how we've come to be in a position where people are really starting to double down on their efforts with first-party data. So now I'd just like to talk broadly about some of the key areas that we see a lot of businesses needing to look at in order to understand how they're going to approach this. So in terms of starting your first-party data strategy, the first thing is to actually begin these conversations as early as possible internally. These kind of conversations are potentially going to be bringing together groups and teams who have not necessarily worked together before, and getting those working relationships up and running before it comes time to actually make some serious decisions about what you're going to do. It's going to be important. The next is understanding your current data use cases, where they source their data from. So speaking to your internal teams and your agencies and your vendors, where are they sourcing this data from? How is it being used? To really understand what the potential exposure is on a per platform and per channel basis. Next up will actually be to look at the existing platforms and technology you have. As I mentioned before, Facebook is already well ahead of the curve in terms of offering a different method of transmitting the address in this particular analogy. You need to be speaking to your other vendors as well and seeing what they're doing, seeing what they can offer you and what's on their roadmap in terms of preparing for this. And to make clear, this is not necessarily a situation that is now static. There have been many changes over the recent months and years, and there will continue to be changes. And finally, there's the idea of reviewing your existing processes and looking at your existing teams. Depending on how they're using their data at the moment, the changes that are coming could significantly change the way that they have to operate, and they need to be part of the conversation and prepared to make those changes as a cohesive group with the business. So once you've run through the 4 potential starter points that I've just mentioned, you may start to look at exploring alternatives. Now, this information comes by way of a fantastic piece of content that's produced by IAB Canada, where they've broken down some of the example methods that people might choose to approach and looked at the pros and cons of each. There are certainly some alternatives which are not going to be impacted by the loss of third-party cookies. Contextual, for example, as Jess was speaking to previously, panel studies and research, they're not reliant on third-party data particularly, and are likely to be less impacted. But there are other methods which you might look at which could provide a lot more value, but perhaps be a bit of a longer path to get there, such as publisher opt-in using PII data. So building your own first-party profiles using consent data that's been passed over with consent and trust from the user, or looking at sharing your first-party data, perhaps via a safe haven to link together what you and perhaps a publisher know about visitors in order to conduct more accurate activity. So The final slide from me here is just to say that there's a lot of information there. Hopefully a bit of scene setting has been useful for you, but regardless of the alternatives and the approach that you choose to take, what's needed right now is a consistent and reliable method to allow the connection of data between platforms, which is based on privacy, trust, and user consent. And the IAB's Project Rearc, which I'm sure that Alex is about to speak to in great detail, is a prime example of this. It's a global collaborative effort to bring the right people together with the right skill set to make sure that we're all working in the same direction. And with that, over to you, Jonas.
Thank you very much, Matt. I really liked the analogy there too in describing the impact, how it works. If we can have all the panelists join us now, please. There we are. I get to see you, Matt.
Yeah.
You're presenting in secrets there, so we can see your visage. Alex, you're out in the garden. Lovely.
Sorry if you can hear the crickets.
You're just trying to escape the US politics, aren't you? Just anything to get away from the media. Well, thank you very much. And as Matt's prompted the question there, Alex, it's perfectly set up to check in with you on where we are with Project Rearc. If you give us a bit of an overview and a sort of status update.
Sure. So for those of you who aren't familiar, Project Rearc is really, it's meant to be a response by the entire industry, from not just advertising technology, but publishers, advertisers, agencies, sort of everyone in the ecosystem, to think about the changes that are coming in browsers, not only with the disappearance of third-party cookies, but changes in mobile operating systems like with iOS, and changes in how potentially how CTV is even measured and targeted or tracked against. So it's a holistic effort with a lot of participation from a lot of different groups, and we're also intending for it to be global. Now, I realize on the other side of, in a different hemisphere, it's hard to do timing for all of you to join us all the time, but we are doing our best, like Jonas mentioned, to keep him informed. So a quick update on it is that we kind of moved through a phase early on of making sure that we were all aligned on the problems that we were trying to address and sort of the constraints for approaching those problems. So that was a pretty big undertaking, which involved a lot of input from publishers and advertisers on their business activities. We've completed that exercise, and now we've moved into, in the last few months, what we do best, I think, at Tech Lab, which is sort of field proposals and really start tearing them apart. And not in a bad way, but just to get down to the nuts and bolts of how this will work, not only technically, but also could it work commercially. And that is happening right now across two groups. You've probably heard that, Trade Desk has a proposal specifically kind of in the first party data activation space. It's the first one that's kind of taken off out of that side of the group, but we also have proposals coming in around, outside of a singular company's sort of approach to, activating first party data. Like the Trade Desk proposal, we have proposals coming in around how can we create accountability for how those, any identifier that represents any kind of personal data might be used, because we think, and then I'll kick it back over. I don't want to take up the whole time giving an update, but we think that a big part of what we're trying to address here is not just a workaround. If we just create a workaround to the disappearance of third-party cookies, we're really just delaying the inevitable on addressing the real kind of data protection and privacy concerns that individuals have. So we're actually spending a lot of time on going in deep on proposals around technical accountability mechanisms, including like technical audits, but also like standardized logging and all of that, to try and demonstrate that when we do get access to data as an ecosystem, that we're only doing what's allowed and not doing what isn't allowed. So that I think is, really critical to our efforts. And there's quite a bit of activity going on there with, we've got hundreds of companies involved at this point. So lots of progress. It's exciting to see it happen. It can't happen fast enough though. So if it feels like it's going slow, like the consensus process is kind of slow, but we realize too that, we're kind of working against a deadline. So anyway, keep looking to Jonas and the team at IB Australia for updates. We'll like he said, we're catching up regularly to make sure he's informed. So even if we're out of your time zone on the East Coast in the US, you can keep up.
Yeah, no, thank you. And we loop those updates. We loop the data council into those updates, the exec tech council into those updates. And I don't think I've told you yet, we're planning a webinar to get an update on Rearc and start looking at the types of solutions you get on December the 10th, 9th for you. So look out for that one, everyone. Thank you. And bringing you in now, Angelo, in terms of Nine and their approach to, really leveraging the scale and quality of the authentic audiences you've been bringing and working on for a while now. From a first-party data perspective, how are you commercially leveraging the assets that you've got?
Look, from our perspective, the journey, and this is probably something for the wider audience, is to understand that it is not a quick journey. Capturing a PI at Nine started at the start of 2016. So if you look at our authenticated users, and it is quite large, across the wider business, that is Nine now, which incorporates the former Fairfax properties. We're standing at about 13 million, but that has been a journey that started in 2016. So probably from my perspective is, that real focus on capturing PI data. I think that's really, really key. And obviously when you're capturing PI data, not everybody on this call is going to be able to capture PI. There has to be a valid value exchange. For publishers, that might be content. For advertisers, it might be some type of light service that's provided. The second point, and again, I know Matt sort of touched on this in his presentation, but it's focusing on the right infrastructure. And a DMP is just one part of it. Most people forget that the data lake and the stitching of all those data attributes, whether it be PI or non-PI, is equally as important. And the third is actually understanding from a commercialization strategy of building your own audiences. It's surprising in 2020 that organizations are still leveraging third-party data audiences or third-party customer segmentation systems whereby they're not, that should run in parallel to leveraging your own data. And at Nine, we use our sort of Nine Tries, which is our own built sort of customer segmentation tool, which is 54 audiences over 9 verticals. That's really key. We still have third-party data providers, but we really do have this focus on leveraging our own data. And it's a question I always ask advertisers. Do you use your own data to buy media? And most commonly, the answer is no.
Yeah, it's a long-term strategy, a long-term investment, but it can be unique per each partner. And I suppose the way that you guys have looked at it over such a long period of time and invested so heavily into it is a sort of best case scenario.
Look, my view is to always focus. And I think I've said this before, the world is becoming, everything old is becoming new again, which is, having started in the direct marketing world where we all lived in a world of PI data. It's interesting that digital has taken 20 years to go back to that. We are all going to become digital direct marketers, whether we like it or not.
See, I knew Wisdom and Age would work for us eventually. So Sarah, just to bring you in, as a brand, Kraft Heinz have been focusing on this type of strategy, which is quite unique for an FMCG, if I'm allowed to say that. And can you talk us through some of the foundational work you've done in establishing a CRM database and working out how to manage the signals appropriately?
Yeah, definitely. We're very new to the first-party data world. Traditionally, FMCG companies haven't had access to any first-party data, and only in June this year did we really want to decide to focus on it. And we did this through utilising and creating a direct-to-consumer platform called Heinz to Home, where we sell directly to our consumers. This is the objective behind this is to drive brand equity and to also collect that first party data and interact directly with our consumers. We've had a lot of learnings already. We're still very much in the growth and foundation phase. We're focusing right now on building our CRM database and capturing that personal information of customers. We are also tagging customers on our site based on their interest, shopping behaviors, and product preferences, which then helps us better target our marketing campaigns to them. We're also creating lookalike segments, which are essentially consumers who possess the same characteristics and behaviors as our customers, and then targeting our marketing campaigns to them to really expand who is buying our products. We're definitely still in the foundation phase. We have only launched about 3 months ago, and we just, I guess, have signed on with a digital agency to help us manage those signals and really manage and grow our CRM database.
Yeah, and I suppose you want to create that sort of virtual circle of activity where one enriches the other, and you keep that sort of positive momentum going.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, so Matt, great presentation. Thanks again. So on that point, in fact, in terms of building out trusted relationships with consumers, how do you what's the starting point? And you touched on it in your presentation, but how do you get them to prepare for the demise of the third-party cookie and be able to build that relationship with consumers as a brand?
Yeah, it's a big one. The way that Alex sort of mentioned in his first couple of comments there around transparency and clarity are going to be key in building trust here. This isn't just a case of figure out another way to get what we want. There has to be a complete mind shift of how we're going to actually allow the right kind of activity to still continue that benefits businesses and consumers equally. You know, diving into dark patterns and implied consent is only going to lower the trust that you could be building up, and is also going to mean if you take that path, you're going to end up with data that you can't use anyway because it's the wrong side of the regulation. So it's just, there's no great reason to be doing that. From a consumer perspective, we really need to be getting ourselves into a place where they can quickly and easily understand what they're consenting to and how that data is going to be used. A challenge that we see with clients quite often actually is encouraging ownership of that discussion within a business, because it is a bit of a gnarly one. A bit of an example at the moment could be someone who maybe is already running a consent platform or tool on their site in order to get people to let them know what cookies are being used for and people opting in and out. Now, the tactical side of that could well be owned by an IT team putting code on a page. But the other end of it, the data that might then end up being gathered is being done by the marketing team, which can sometimes mean that you find conversations where you've got an IT team saying, hey, I set it up how you asked me to, and the marketing team going, why did you let me collect this data? Well, that's not a spot anybody really wants to be in. So you need to cover that crack potentially, and make sure that that it is an owned process from start to finish. The other side of it, really, from my point of view, is once the consent has been granted, the second part of this is really giving your users a solid reason to exchange that useful information, which is exactly where Angelo was going. You know, you need a proper value exchange, which can be used for a user to trust your brand, provide some form of identifier that you can then use as the seed around which to build your profiles and data. But for a lot of businesses, and exactly as Angelo mentioned, this may not be in their DNA. They may not have had to do it before. It could be an entirely new experience. Building out new content and functionality could well mean involving content teams and other teams that are not naturally part of the marketing process. So even once you've gone beyond that point and you now have the data that's coming in, you now need to make sure that you've got the platforms and the technology and the owners who are actually sitting there and going, okay, I know that I've got this data, I need to secure it, I need to make sure I'm privacy conscious, and I need to make sure it's correctly labeled and so on for use throughout the rest of the business. So a lot of different areas to focus on, but they are all equally important. If you have any one of those bits that you miss, you're not going to have a successful time here.
Yeah, no, it's great advice, particularly the joined up alignment across a large organization. Certainly seen that we've got certain capabilities being run for one tactical requirement, and then strategically other people are sort of replicating that with other solutions. It can cause absolute chaos if you don't get that cross alignment across all the departments and various bits of a large business.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Alex, we're going to leverage your global status and access just to ask, interesting with some of the trends and approaches that Matt mentioned in his presentation in terms of you know, how to prepare, how to potentially target or segment. But are you seeing any interesting, unique approaches from businesses or any unique insights or trends you can share?
Yeah. So, I mean, to your point, like our view is global. We have now employees kind of across the globe. We have the most in the US right now, but we're in Europe. We're just starting to be sort of in the APAC region. But I'm definitely working globally and have been since before starting at Tech Lab even. I spent about 8 years in ad tech. So yeah, I think what I think is interesting, especially potentially for this audience, is, publishers. I think there's a pendulum swing, right, with what's happening here, because in a lot of ways, the last 10 or however many years of digital advertising have been, advertiser finding their audience for the, potentially the cheapest that they can to really, set the equation right for their ROI. Not that they're buying always cheaply, but that's been the conception. And I think now, because of the potential reduction of cross-site tracking, which is enabled by third-party cookies, right? It puts, it changes the power dynamic a little bit. That's not to say that advertisers lose out. I think smart advertisers will see that and say, okay, which publishers do we want to work with to, activate our data? But the trend, though, is more around, especially in markets that there are some, I guess, really large scale publishers and not tons of them. So this wouldn't necessarily be true in the UK or the US, but potentially in Australia, Nine's on, and you mentioned the Fairfax sort of being in the family as well.
Yeah.
The ability to create sort of identity, like federated identity consortiums, like that's happening in Germany right now. There's a solution that's a not-for-profit that's tech called NetID that's powering sort of authenticated audiences across publishers, so that publishers can kind of work together to offer sort of a lot of what advertisers have been used to in terms of buying their audience and measuring cross-site, potentially in a slightly scaled down way, but also, at the same time in a way that they definitely know what they're buying on. Yeah. And the publisher, sort of regains a bit of, leverage in that conversation. So that's an obvious sort of business move that requires some technical underpinnings. And I think everything that's been mentioned already in terms of, like, you shouldn't be doing this surreptitiously. Like, this should all be transparent and above board to a user. If you're planning, if you're giving users free content, for one, like explaining the value exchange and what you're doing to enable in the example, Heinz or whoever it is to either retarget you or measure the fact that their advertising was effective. So yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting things that I'm seeing, is that shift in the traditional digital advertising power dynamic, and then publishers taking advantage of technologies that can safely stitch identities together without having to spray those identities out to thousands of parties, right?
Yeah, it feels like it's more qualitative these days. A great focus on quality for all the right reasons, but as well as that comes the challenge of scale and reach. So how you build out that combination of the two from an advertising perspective is going to be an interesting challenge, and the regional differences too will be interesting to watch. Thank you. Angelo, going back to sort of the collection point in terms of data, types of data, what types of data, how do you determine what to collect in terms of what you are obliged to collect and kind of what you want to collect? How does that, how do you work that at Nine?
Yeah, definitely. Look, from my perspective, there's two types of data you can collect. And I know I'm going back to basics here for the audience, but there's obviously the online behavioral data that you collect through the content consumption. And that's been collected for many years. We do all of that, and that doesn't sort of change moving forward. Where the business has changed is around the PI data that we collect. And typically, we're looking at about 6 fields, first name, surname, email address, year of birth, gender, and postcode. And why do we collect those fields? We collect those fields because, in effect, if you look at sort of a year of birth or gender, they're really important segments from a demo targeting perspective. And if you look at sort of the digital media industry, when you start doing the analysis, roughly about 50% of all digital media is typically bought with some type of demo, age and gender segment. So as much as we have vast amounts of third-party data segments and the like, predominantly most of your data is being bought digitally, leveraging age and gender. So you're collecting data that is relevant to what advertisers actually want. And I think that's really, really key.
Yeah, I mean, it's the foundational part of every brief, right? I mean, that's been the case for a while.
And I will add, there is one point. Just because you can collect data doesn't mean you should be collecting the data. And a really good example, a number of years back, we were debating at Nine the concept of whether we captured a date of birth or a year of birth. And the fact of the matter was, which I sat in a room and said, well, I only need the year of birth to put you into an age segment. There is no need for me to capture date of birth. And I think this is really key. And this relates back to your trusted brand status. Only collect the data that is actually required to provide the services. And that statement should be sitting inside your privacy policy. Most people on this call will find privacy policies sort of hiding away on their particular websites, but it's really key that you actually have that articulated for all to see and only collect the data that is actually required in that scenario. The other thing also, and this is where I think a lot of the digital media industry falls into a trap, most people don't read the Australian privacy principles. And there is a thing in APP3 which relates to sensitive information. So there's a whole series of categories of data you should not be collecting. And I suggest everybody on this call to Google and actually look at what that sensitive information is and make sure your organization is not collecting that. You will not develop that trusted brand status if you're moving into areas that, from a regulation perspective, you're in breach of.
Yeah, I think there's 13 principles within that. And that's I think that's a great point. It's heartening to see that that you making that point, Angela, in terms of privacy being up front and center in the conversations. Too often it's sort of the thing. I mean, I'll hold my hand up, having been around, so you sort of check that off at the end. You know what I mean? It's towards the end of the execution of a plan or whatever. So having that front and center and thinking about it before you do anything.
And I think this is where social media have maybe sort of a couple of years back got themselves into a world of pain because they were able to collect the information, but they weren't actually thinking about, did they need to collect the information? And I think that's a key question you've got to ask yourself within an organization.
Yeah. In fact, for those on the webinar, we will be doing a privacy webinar on the 3rd of December, which you can look out for. And we'll provide, along with that session, a whole bunch of the current state of play, including those 13 principles that we've mentioned, because the questions come through about it. So thank you, Angelo. Sarah, in terms of, we've talked about the value exchange and how a brand such as yours, as you're setting up in terms of capabilities, executing the strategy, can you give us a couple of examples of that sort of value exchange that relationship as you establish it with your customers and how you build that trusted relationship?
Yeah, definitely. The value exchange is a very important part of collecting and gathering first-party data. Our core focus right now is on creating bundles and products that consumers want to purchase. We just did like a limited edition partnership with Collingwood Football Club where we did Heinz Ketchup with Collingwood players on it. And you also got Collingwood Football Club merch. This was a great way for us to establish a relationship with Collingwood members and fans. A lot of them then subscribed to our CRM database, which has allowed us to have an ongoing relationship with them. One of the challenges with growing the CRM database is obviously the opt-in requirement. And for those who aren't familiar with it, consumers have to go out of a way to tick a box to subscribe. However, we're working now on, I guess, limiting that or addressing that limitation through incentivizing subscription. So as of next week, if consumers sign up to our email database, they'll also receive a discount on their products. And then moving into 2021, we're now working on a range of benefits for consumers signing up, from special discounts to free delivery weekends, to also being able to have their say in what products we offer. We run a range of like surveys on the site right now to get consumers' feedback, but we're really going to open that up to them. And then in the future, we hope to have consumers have their say in our MPD process around what products that they want to see the company develop, also what like pack formats that they're interested in as well. We, I guess, use a lot of third-party data to try and get this information and use a lot of agencies. But we're really trying to, I guess, internalize it and utilize that. And we've really discovered that consumers love to have their say. We've been overwhelmed with how many people want to give us feedback on different areas, and it really develops that long-lasting relationship.
So what are the methods of engagement? Is it sort of by email? Is it online, through social? There's a whole range of different sort of touch points, engagement points.
Yeah, so through email, socials right now. We're looking at, I guess, in the future, whether we try and make the website more interactive and have consumers, you know, participate in like an entertainment hub there, which we can also conduct then gamified market research as well. Yeah, we're really focusing on it at the moment and working out what the plan is.
Interesting, behaving almost like a media owner.
Yeah.
I love the AFL approach, particularly here in Melbourne, for instance. But next time, I really think you should try something.
Yeah, yeah, we're hoping to, you know, open it up to more teams next year.
It's very smart. So Matt, just to check in with you in terms of how you approach your conversations with clients around capabilities in terms of where to start with the level of investment that's required to take on some of the recommendations that you mentioned earlier. I mean, where do you think they can start to build the internal cases coherently? Where can they look to sort of be persuasive across all the departments, particularly with the bean counters as a starting point?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Because for some clients, this can be a brand new venture for them. A lot of times they will have heard about platforms and solutions that are floating around and maybe under the assumption that they can just take something off the shelf and plug it in and great, I've patched over and I'm up and running. That is, if for anybody that wasn't clear on that already, that's absolutely not the case. There will not be an off-the-shelf kind of setup here that you can plug and play and say it costs this much, it'll take me this long and give me 3 months, we'll be up and running. It's much more of a careful combination of process, strategy, and eventually getting into the tools if you're starting to replumb how and where you're placing your data to make sure you get the capabilities right for the business. In terms of prioritizing and securing the budget for those kind of initiatives, the first place that we'd be asking people to look at is around the opportunity cost. If you are thinking that perhaps you'll sit back and start working on this once the third-party data goes away, you're really opening yourself up to the impacts of that for much longer than potentially your competitors will be. And also, once you reach that point of no longer having access to third-party data, it's going to be much tougher to kickstart your first-party strategy. Third-party data is still here at the moment, and it can absolutely be used to kickstart this kind of activity. So provided that you are comfortable with the way it's collected and that the consent is there and so on, you can still be using that to drive the upper funnel activity to bring people to the site, which then means that they're coming up against, as Sarah mentioned, the value exchanges, where you're increasing the amount of opportunities you get to actually capture and engage with these consumers. Mm-hmm. And that will form the seeds of the strategy and the profiles that you develop in the longer run. To give like a really useful, well, what I consider to be a useful example of that is we know from discussions with one of the big 4 banks in Australia that they basically took a long look at how much extra they would need to find to invest in traditional media channels to have parity of reach once third-party data goes away, which essentially gave them a dollar figure saying, we're going to need to put this much into TV and radio, for example, to keep reaching the same number of people. And that became the investment amount that they were able to then pump back into the business and say, right, we're going to use that money to invest in a strategy, a process, a CDP, a CMP, all of the various tools that sort of go with this. We could have a whole other session on all the extra 3-letter acronyms that have cropped up as I was trying to solve this. So yeah, along those lines, the next step really is using the knowledge that you've acquired during the investigation process. So if you think back to the 4 steps, the 4 general areas that I mentioned towards the end of the presentation, that's going to give you the lay of the land. That will let you know where to actually start matching things up. so that ultimately it's going to come down to identifying the areas of greatest value that are going to be the most impacted by the loss of third-party data, and use that to set your priorities as a business.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. We did produce over a year ago now, or actually 18 months, I'd say, an ad tech buyer's guide where we sort of gave an introduction to all the platform types and just some fairly general, but we'd like to think sensible advice in terms of how to go about it. So thank you for that. Another quick plug is the impact paper that the Ad Effectiveness Council have put out recently, very much from a measurement and attribution perspective. Some guidelines that have been put out there in terms of the impact of what we'll see by the demise of third-party cookies along the lines of Matt's presentation. So one last question. I'm going to throw it to you, Alex. Just, I don't know if we're allowed a little sneak peek in terms of the types of approaches that you're starting to see. You don't have to name names, but are you seeing quite a wide range of solution-based approaches in terms of, are we going to retain data within the browser? Is it going to sit out on a third-party secure server? Are you starting to see it fall into a few areas? You don't have to name names or go into too much detail.
I mean, everyone's trying to predict this. I think the safest way to say this, but also probably the truest way to say this, is there's not going to be a single replacement to the way that we do identity today. And you think about identity too as not just, retargeting or even attribution. It's everything from frequency capping to, that chart was actually really great. I think he said it was IAB Canada who put that together. Mm-hmm. I think those types of charts are how I've been thinking about this, is like, okay, for what is likely to be the scaled solution in each of these buckets. I do not think that logged in audiences are going to be the scaled solution in any of those buckets. I think they're going to grow. But I think, at the end of the day, users aren't just going to all of a sudden change behavior and start logging into a lot of different things. So I think that won't be a direct replacement. I think one thing that I'm starting to see is that sort of the technology providers that work with the kind of sell side of the equation as we think of it are kind of reimagining some of what they're able to do. The DSPs and ad tech have been kind of thought of as the sort of targeting engines. And I don't think that's going to completely change necessarily, but SSPs now realize, because a publisher is, their audience is now desired, because if they can identify who a user is uniquely in some way, you can potentially build a, site specific or even, consortium specific audiences. So that I think is going to be a pretty decent shift. And I'm already seeing a lot of like SSPs kind of change, not even necessarily change, but like really push on some of the things that they just started pushing on, like exchange traded deals and all that kind of stuff.
Evolving, yeah.
So I think that's going to pop up as not again a direct replacement for, sort of buying audience data from a DMP, but it's a thing that will be a lot bigger than it is right now. And then I think, you asked the question about browser, or I guess what I would call user agent control. That's the $1 million question. Like, I think, Australia has obviously seen a lot of recent activity versus sort of the big platforms. Even today in the US, you had the Department of Justice in the US, taking aim at big platforms. So yes, there's a lot of activity going on around sort of on-device identity that basically can't leave a device, meaning like it doesn't go to the advertiser, it doesn't go to the publisher, it sits on a device, and definitely doesn't go to any third parties. I think aspects of that are definitely going to take off. Like there's a thing called privacy budget and a thing called trust token that are all meant to kind of reduce fingerprinting. I think some of the bigger things that potentially replace large swaths of what other vendors provide in the ecosystem today are going to be hard pressed to keep pushing forward, saying like, yeah, we should really completely disrupt all of these other businesses while we're under, you know, governmental scrutiny around competition. So like that's again, that's very much even simplifying my own view of it, but I kind of think about it in those general buckets.
Great to get insight. Thank you. And as mentioned, we'll come back to this topic in December with Tech Lab. So look out for that. And that was a good, sensible question to a rather tabloidy kind of question. Well, thank you very much, panelists. That was fantastic. Finishing up with this session, just to mention and a reminder about the information you can find within the data handbook that the Data Council put out recently. And thank you very much again to everyone. Thanks for everyone for joining in. And we'll try and share as much information as possible along with the recording of this session as we can. And I'll hand back to Nat.
Thanks, JJ. That was brilliant. Our poll this morning, the audience here, overwhelming in their request for information around the implications of the cookie retirement and how to get started in this area of first-party data. So your team of experts here have done a great job of starting to give us some information around that. We've also posted lots of information in the chat today. JJ's mentioned the data handbook from the Data Council there. A couple of other resources that are available to IAB members in this area. JJ writes for us a fortnightly AdTech Matters article, which has got great information around AdTech, where he'll keep us updated on what's going on through Project Rearc there as well. Another one for IAB members is a policy and privacy briefing that's being written by Peter Leonard, who is a privacy expert from Data Synergies. The first of those briefings is actually available on our website at the moment, and we've got our second briefing coming next week. So some more resources there to improve your knowledge in this area. So thank you to all our panelists there, Matt, Sarah, Angelo. Oops, sorry. Moving on to our last presentation of today. This year, the IAB ran our inaugural MeasureUp Research Awards to recognise Great Australian Trade Marketing Research. And we wanted to celebrate insightful research being carried out across the market and to further encourage investment into quality media research. These awards were enthusiastically judged by the MFA Interactive Committee. Great committee consists of senior digital expert representatives of all the major media agency groups. The winners of the two categories were announced at the opening of MeasureUp yesterday. Today, I'm really pleased to introduce the winner of the Best Advertising Effectiveness Research Study, Playground XYZ, to present highlights from their winning entry, Attention Time, Redefining How Marketers Measure and Optimize Ads in Real Time. The judges described this research as an innovative and exploratory piece of research that increases understanding of the science behind user attention and has found new ways that these insights can be implemented in real time on media buys. I'd like to welcome you now, welcome Rob Hall, the CEO of Playground XYZ. He's going to give us a glimpse of these insights from his award-winning study. Welcome, Rob.
Hi, Natalie. Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure.
Can you hear and see me okay?
I can see you today. Would you like to take the screen and take us through your research?
It'd be a pleasure. Let me do that right now. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep, can do.
Great. You can see my screen?
I can. Do you want to put in presentation mode? Can you do that?
I think I have. Oh, yeah, okay, this one. Okay, wonderful.
Now, perfect.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited to share what we learned here. This has been a really interesting journey for us. What started off as a piece of research, it's actually changed the whole course of our company. And we've actually sort of moved into this space now where we're into measurement and optimization of ads. And our legacy was all about rich media. So it's quite a pivot, and the team and I guess our objectives have changed massively as a result of these learnings. So I guess the first thing is, you know, the background to all of this is this kind of premise called the attention economy, where really it's all about how advertisers are basically fighting for share of mind. You know, society, we have more devices and more content on those devices, more information, and as a result, more ads than ever before. As humans, we have fixed, or some say declining, attention spans. And the result of that means that there's a thing known as an attention deficit in the middle. As advertisers, we're fighting for that attention deficit, and that very fight sort of manifests itself in this phrase known as the attention economy, the treatment of attention as a kind of valuable and scarce commodity. So we all want attention on our ads, and we started thinking, well, what does that mean? And does attention mean viewability? Is viewability you know, a good proxy for attention? And yes, it is okay, but it does have some, it does leave some things to be desired. So the challenge with viewability is that while an ad can be on the screen, it could also be on the screen and not seen. And I think that we forget sometimes that viewability is really the opportunity to see, not being seen itself. So all of these thoughts are percolating in our minds as we sort of enter this research. We thought really what we're after as advertisers and marketers is what we're going to call a metric we're calling attention time. The length of time in seconds someone actually looks at your ad. Now, the interesting thing about attention time is it obviously goes a level deeper than viewability. And we thought that that was really what we wanted to understand with our research here. So here's our study. We have basically 3 key hypotheses and 3 associated projects. So the first one is that it's possible to measure attention time at scale. That in itself is a big challenge because, yep, you can go and do eye tracking research. You can get 30 people into a lab pretty easily. Costs you a bit of money, but it's possible. You can put on eye tracking headsets and do that stuff. But to really make a difference and understand attention, we knew that we had to make the measurement scale across millions or billions of impressions. So that project 1 was basically, can we build an AI that can tell us how long someone's looked at an ad out on the World Wide Web? Pretty exciting. Second hypothesis was that attention time is a more powerful driver of brand outcomes than viewability. So, you know, back to the start, if there's no difference between what viewability does to awareness, recall, etc., than what attention time does, then there's no point doing this project. So we needed to bed that down. So for that we did a series of brand studies, and we'll show through those results. And the last one is that we can actually intervene in programmatic media buying and optimize to attention time. Again, it's nice having stuff that's kind of academic in the sense that, oh yeah, more attention time equals more X. But if we can't do something about it in this brave new world of, you know, programmatically traded media, it's 2020. You don't want a report to walk over and, you know, make manual changes. You want all these things to happen in real time. So that was our third thing. And to sort of prove or disprove that, we built a system that allowed us to selectively buy impressions to maximize attention time. Right, so into the first section. This is the first project, as I mentioned. So the first thing was we wanted to build a way to measure attention time at scale. And to do that, we looked at AI as a, you know, artificial intelligence-based techniques for measurement. Now, with all AI, you need to basically feed it a heap of training data. So the first step for us was figuring out how we get reams and reams of eye tracking data. Like I mentioned before, if we wanted to do that through a lab with headsets, would have cost us a lot of time and money to get enough training data. So instead, we went and built our own proprietary web browser. And by that, what I mean is it's an app that lives on people's phones. Think of it like Chrome or Safari, but in our web browser, we recruit people to it with the help of Kantar and other, recruitment houses. And we recruit people to it and we say, look, we want you to browse the internet through our app, and we're going to conduct eye tracking research. We're going to use the front-facing camera on the phone, triangulate back to your eyes and then to the screen. So kind of like trigonometry from the phone to the eyes back to the screen, and figure out where you're looking. And we're going to get you to browse the internet, so real people browsing real websites with real ads on them, and we're going to track where you really look, and importantly, how long you look at ads for. So this in itself was a huge piece of work. We had to build a whole piece of, an eye gaze model where we had to train the AI to understand where people are looking. But having done that, and this is now, on mobile and on desktop, so we have a desktop version of this too. Now we had that. Now that's the data coming in, but what we're collecting is where you're looking for how long. But how does that help an AI do stuff in the real world? Well, in addition to where you look, we also collected these 40 other data signals. So every single attribute on the page and every single thing that the user was doing, nothing's private PII or personally identifiable, but it's all these things like how fast are you scrolling, how long is the page in pixels, how many words are on that page, how many ads are on that page, what are those ads for, what's the page for, how big are the ads, how small are the ads, etc., etc. Now consider these 40 variables, and the 41st variable is the camera data of where you're looking. Well, we fed all of that 70,000 times into a convolutional neural network. So a CNN is basically a machine learning tool. It's a part of the AI framework, a learning tool that says, hey, we want to understand relationships. So we gave it a problem and we said, in the real world AI, you're going to have 40 out of 41 of the available data signals. You'll have all of that stuff about what the consumer's doing on the page, but you won't have the camera data. And how well can you reconstruct the act of looking with 40 out of 41 of those available signals? And it turns out pretty good. So this process allowed us to then sort of scale attention measurement across the World Wide Web and break free of purely panel-based approaches. The results are here, and this we're really excited, I guess, by where this landed. So on this chart here, what you can see is the predicted attention that our AI does versus the actual attention, which is what the eye tracking panel did. So we ran basically an A/B test, and we said, look, we want to check that the AI is making the right extrapolations here. So if you look at the chart, basically here, we split the data into deciles. So, 10% buckets. And you can see here that the predicted attention from the AI closely follows the observed or real attention from the panel across all the deciles very closely. And when you look at it on a mean basis, in terms of, the average, the mean predicted attention time was 931 milliseconds versus 994. So the AI's extrapolations are 95% accurate in the way that it can measure attention time out on the World Wide Web. That's really exciting because it means that you can now start to scale this concept of attention measurement, knowing that the AI is both trained by eye tracking and verified by eye tracking. So it's a closed loop. The second hypothesis, now that we were sort of able to do this at large, was, right, does attention time drive a brand forward? And is there a difference between attention time and viewability? So here we did a series of brand studies. And thanks to Kantar, because they helped verify the statistical claims of this part. So basically, this was a pretty typical setup. 691 people in the control, 555 in the exposed, statistically significant size, representative of the general population, all of that stuff. And basically, we asked them a series of brand questions. So the first thing is, what's the effect of any attention time on things like awareness and recall? So the good news is that looking does something. So that's what we all wanted to know. Looking at an ad is a good thing. The very act of looking at it for greater than 0 seconds means that you can get a 25% lift in awareness and 79% lift in recall. Great. But that's just whether you looked or not, quite binary. What about the relationship between how long you looked and these kind of brand metrics? And the results here were really interesting because basically we learned that more is more. The longer you look, the more awareness and recall kept climbing. And you can see here on the charts what happens when you look between 1 and 10 seconds, 10 and 20, and greater than 20. Interestingly, if you boil that down into a simple kind of formula, what you can say is things like, for each extra second of attention time, your odds of driving awareness increase by 11%. So basically, each extra second is moving awareness forward up to 11%. Each extra second increases your chance of driving recall forward up by 7%. More is more. And if we can get 5 seconds of attention versus 1 for our advertisers, then absolutely we should be doing that. Now, here's a really interesting part. Looking at isolating the impact that attention time had in driving awareness and recall compared to what are currently our industry's best kind of metrics, like things like viewability. So the way this works is it's called importance modeling. And you basically look at how important is this ingredient in driving that outcome. Attention time came out radically higher than anything else. In terms of awareness, it came out at 7.5 times more important at driving awareness than viewability is. 7.5 times. And then in terms of recall, it's 5.9 times more important than driving recall than viewability is. So it was evident when we got these results in that attention time is a hugely powerful metric, that if we can optimize just that step further than viewability and go to attention time, we're going to get really big sort of tasty gains when it comes to awareness and recall. Now, the third thing was all about, can we intervene, in media buying and actually make a difference? Because again, these things are okay when they're academic, but you kind of want to do something about it. And for that, we built a way that we hypothesized that we could build a way to actually intervene in an ad auction, in an auction, and filter out the impressions that we don't want to buy in an attempt to drive the attention time up. So interestingly here, basically, if you think about this in the previous steps, I showed that how the AI can measure attention now out on the World Wide Web. Well, what we started observing was that there was a lot of variance occurring at an article level. So the same creative got radically different attention on different articles. Publisher had a role to play, certainly. Placement has a role to play. Format has a role to play. But article is a key driver of attention time. And, Jess was talking before about things like context. Well, we're absolutely sure that context is playing a big role in determining the attention an ad gets. So having observed a wild variance of attention time on different article URLs, we started to think, well, let's rank these URLs top to bottom and create segments. Let's group all of the large attention URLs together, all of the medium attention URLs, and all the small attention URLs. And we did just that. And as I said before, our goal was, let's target the large ones and see if attention moves up as a result. And on campaign 1, we achieved a 32% lift in attention time. So, starting off at about 3.25 seconds and ending up at about 4.25. So that was great. In campaign 2 was even stronger, and there's a 54% lift over the course of the campaign by doing this real-time optimization from just over 4 seconds up to just under 6.5. The latest stuff we're doing now, we're getting up to 100% lift in some cases. And as I showed before, that lift makes tangible difference to brand metrics. So this is all kind of worthwhile in our opinion. Lastly, just in terms of the impact of the research, it's been, like I said, quite a journey. Really, when I look back on it, we never knew that we would come out in this sort of space. It's fascinating, but really attention time in our mind has kind of become a metric that we'd associate with quality. So, I think the space will shape up that on one side of the ledger, you're going to have, all of the quantity-based stuff, all about brand safety, human traffic, human brand safe. We measure 100% of impressions. We make sure there's no fraud, and we make sure it's viewable. But on the other side of the ledger, we sort of think there's a space for a quality metric. And quality is all about how long did that person look at your ad and what was the outcome. So attention time is quite exciting there. In terms of, it's a really great metric for ad relevance, we think. So it talks about that creative's resonance to that consumer on that page. And it factors in their relative appetite for that creative. So it captures ad relevance really well. It's very human-centric. So it's all about how long someone chooses to spend with your ad. Viewability can be spoofed by making sticky placements and stuff. Attention can't. It's identity independent. There's no cookies in any of this. So it's going to scale. JJ and the guys were talking about a cookieless future. People talk about that a lot. This is a cookieless approach to improving performance. It's highly predictive of brand outcomes, 7.5 times more powerful than things like viewability, and you can optimize it. So it's pretty exciting. A bunch of brands are part of this study and have come on this journey with us, and working with a heap of them around the world now, US, UK, and APAC. And interestingly, this kind of thing that started off just measuring a part of the internet, we're now sort of in a rollout of where we're going to measure more and more stuff. So we're covering all the IAB formats for display, and both mobile and desktop. We'll start covering outstream and pre-roll and social and other stuff too. So yeah, like I said, we're on a bit of a journey now to measure and quantify attention across the internet. It's been exciting, and thanks Kantar for their help with the research paper, and all the brands and agencies, the IAB and the MFA for the judging and the awards and having us today. The next round of trials starts soon. We'd love to chat to people if you're interested.
Thanks so much, Rob, and congratulations again to you and the team. Just, I guess, a couple of things if you can comment on to finish us off. Such an innovative study, and you've got 3 big projects there all in one. Can you touch on just how you managed that internally with just the risk involved and getting stakeholders on board with that internally, and then also some of your clients' reactions and what you've heard from the market about this?
Yeah, I mean, pretty scary time. Pretty scary time, particularly recently, to be putting a lot into CapEx and CapEx and OpEx with the economy like it is. So definitely had to put a business case together around why we would spend so much on a project like this. Graham here, who's just shared his camera. He's been a big driving force behind it on our end. Maybe you can share your experience getting the troops rallied for this, Graham.
Well, I think the engineers loved the challenge, so we built a mobile game so that we could collect enough training data for our eye gaze model. So I guess we're lucky to have a lot of multi-skilled ninjas who can jump from one project to the next. And I think that's our key strength as an organisation, solving totally different problems, whether they're data and mathematical problems or creative and user experience problems, bringing it together into a pipeline to deliver this type of outcome.
Awesome.
In terms of the client stuff, Natalie, so yeah, I mean, some lovely sort of feedback coming from those guys, particularly those that part of our white paper and saying stuff like, this is the type of thing we've been looking for viewability was always, it made sense in a hygiene perspective, but it doesn't get us that it doesn't get us that security we want, that someone actually paid attention and that I'm actually, punching above my weight than my competitors. Viewability, you can put a McDonald's ad and a KFC ad on the same page and they can have the same viewability score, but the attention might be very different. And so attention time is drawing out a nuanced results and insights that viewability sort of can't, and that's what they're excited about.
That's great. Thank you both for sharing today. Congratulations again. We're going to post the link to the white paper there so that people can have a further look at the results. But thank you so much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Okay. That always wraps our presentations up for today. Thank you to all of our wonderful presenters and panelists. You've been amazing and provided the industry with such insight and perspectives today. Please join us tomorrow. We have one more day of MeasureUp and another packed agenda around building resilient brands. So we've got some great presentations lined up here from Ipsos, from the University of Technology in Sydney, an amazing looking panel around whether brands and marketers should play an active role in societal change. And we'll also have a presentation from our second award winner, our Best Cultural and Societal and Consumer Behaviour Research, presented by our winner, Media. Thank you once again to all of our sponsors, Google, IAS, Ipsos and Facebook. Good news is if you've missed any of the sessions from MeasureUp, they are being recorded and will be available next week. Thanks for joining us today and I hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you.